I was in the middle of repotting my tomatoes when my phone rang. That's the detail I always come back to. The soil was still on my hands, dark and damp, and I almost didn't answer because I thought it was my insurance company again. I almost let it go to voicemail. Sometimes I think about that, how close I came to missing it. It was my son-in-law's neighbor, a woman named Cecile, someone my daughter had mentioned once or twice in passing. She said she'd found my number through the emergency contact list on my daughter's refrigerator. She said she was sorry to call like this out of nowhere, but she didn't know what else to do. She said my daughter was in her backyard, that she'd crawled there. I was in my car before she finished the sentence. My daughter's name is Iris. She's 34 years old, and she has her father's eyes, this particular shade of gray-green that changes depending on the light. She married a man named Philip 3 years ago in a ceremony that cost more than my first house, in a venue his mother had chosen, with flowers his mother had arranged, and a dress his mother had helped select. I smiled through all of it. I told myself it was just enthusiasm. I told myself some mothers are like that with their sons. I drove 40 minutes to get to Cecile's house. I don't remember most of the drive. I remember running 2 red lights and not caring. When I got there, Iris was sitting in a lawn chair with a blanket around her shoulders. Even though it was the middle of July, her left eye was swollen nearly shut. Her lip was split. She had bruises along her forearm in the shape of fingers. 4 distinct marks on one side, a thumbprint on the other. Someone had grabbed her hard enough to leave a map of themselves on her skin. When she saw me, she didn't cry. She just opened her mouth and said, in this voice I didn't recognize, this thin, scraped-down version of her voice, "Mom." His mother told him to. I sat down on the grass in front of her. I didn't trust my legs to hold me. His mother told him that I had it coming, she said. She said I was beneath this family. She's been saying it for 2 years, Mom. I didn't want to tell you because I knew what you'd do. I held her hands. Her knuckles were scraped. She'd fought back. That's my daughter. Even at the worst moment of her life, she fought back. I need to tell you about Philip's mother, because you cannot understand any of what happened without understanding her first. Her name is Lorraine. She is 61 years old. She drives a white Cadillac, and she has the kind of smile that's warm on the surface and completely empty underneath. The kind of smile that's really just a warning you don't recognize until it's too late. She collects antiques. She chairs committees. She has her nails done every Thursday at 2 o'clock without exception. From the moment Iris and Philip got engaged, Lorraine made her position clear without ever saying it directly. She never said she thought Iris wasn't good enough. She would say things like, "It's just that Philip has always had a certain standard of living." She would say things like, "We've always been very careful about who we bring into this family." She would say it with that smile. And Iris would come home and call me, and I could hear in her voice that she was trying to convince herself it was nothing. I made myself stay quiet. I made myself be patient. I told Iris that some people come around once grandchildren arrive, once they see the marriage working, once they feel secure. I told her to give it time. I have spent the last year wishing I had said something different, because what I didn't know, what Iris only told me that afternoon in Cecile's backyard, was that Lorraine had been working on Philip for months before it ever got physical, dripping things into his ear. She doesn't respect our family. She's pulling you away from us. A man needs a wife who builds him up, not one who questions him. Little drops, steady as rain until the stone wore through. Philip had started drinking. Iris hadn't told me that either. She'd been covering for him, making excuses, carrying the whole weight of it alone, while I planted tomatoes 40 minutes away and thought everything was probably fine. I called my brother from Cecile's driveway. His name is Raymond. He's 67, 2 years older than me, and he worked 30 years as a sheriff's deputy in this county before he retired. He knows every judge, every prosecutor, every clerk of court. He is the calmest person I have ever known, and he is absolutely terrifying when he decides something needs to be done. I told him what Iris looked like. I told him what she'd said. There was a silence on his end that wasn't emptiness. It was the sound of Raymond deciding things. "Don't go back to that house," he said. "Not yet. Take her to the ER first. Document everything. I'll make some calls." Raymond. "Document everything," he said again. "That's the most important thing right now. Everything else comes after." He was right. I knew he was right. But I want to be honest with you. There was a part of me in that moment that didn't want to be right. There was a part of me that wanted to drive to that house and stand on the doorstep and let Lorraine see my face. I'm 65 years old. I've raised 2 children alone after their father left. I've buried my mother and my best friend, and I've kept going every time. I have never in my life wanted to frighten someone the way I wanted to frighten her that afternoon. I took Iris to the emergency room instead. The nurse who checked her in was a young woman with a long braid and a very steady voice, and she asked the questions the way they're trained to, carefully, without judgment. Iris answered everything. I sat beside her and held her hand and didn't say a word, because it wasn't my story to tell, and because I knew if I started talking, I might not stop. The doctor confirmed 2 cracked ribs, the orbital bruising around her eye, the soft tissue damage on her arms. He used words like blunt force and defensive wounds. And I watched those words land on Iris, and I watched her absorb them, straighten her spine slightly, make herself hold still. The nurse asked if she wanted to file a police report. Iris looked at me. I didn't tell her what to do, but I didn't look away either. She said yes. What I didn't tell Iris yet, what I was still turning over in my mind while she was being examined, was what Cecile had told me before I left her house. Cecile had seen Lorraine's car in Philip and Iris's driveway that morning. She'd seen it pull up at 7 a.m. She thought it was unusual because Iris had mentioned to her once that Lorraine usually called before coming over. But Cecile had gone about her morning, and then around 9, she'd heard something through the fence. She said she wasn't sure what exactly, just a sound that made her go still in her kitchen and listen. And then it stopped. And then, an hour later, she'd found Iris at the back of the yard, near the fence gate. Lorraine had been there. She had been there that morning. When Raymond called back, I told him that. Another silence. Then, so, she didn't just influence him. She was present. That's what Cecile says. Can Cecile put that in writing? I looked back through the ER window at Cecile, who had insisted on driving to the hospital and was now sitting in the waiting room with her hands folded in her lap. A 60-year-old woman who had crawled through her own fence gate to help my daughter and then driven 40 minutes to make sure she was okay. Yes, I said. I think she can. Philip called my cell phone at 4 that afternoon. I let it ring. He called 3 more times. I let all of it ring. There is a particular kind of discipline required to let a phone ring when you have things to say, and my mother taught it to me, and her mother taught it to her, and I was grateful for it that day. He sent a text that said, "Please don't make this bigger than it is. Iris knows I love her. We just need some time to work through this ourselves." I read it twice, then I forwarded it to Raymond. Lorraine called an hour later. I answered that one. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask about Iris. What she said. And I want to be precise because I have played this back in my head many times. I think we both know that Iris has never been an easy person, and I hope you're not going to encourage her to blow this out of proportion. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was sitting in the hospital parking garage, and there was a pigeon walking along the concrete ledge in front of my car, and I watched it while I decided what to say. I said, "Lorraine, I want you to know that I've recorded this call. You should probably speak to an attorney." Then I hung up. I hadn't actually recorded it. But Raymond had told me once, years ago, that sometimes the most important thing you can say to someone is the thing that makes them stop and think before their next move. That you don't win by shouting. You win by making the other person uncertain. I sat in the parking garage for another few minutes. Then I went back inside to my daughter. The next 2 weeks were the kind of exhausting that gets into your bones. Iris came to stay with me. She slept in her old room. In her old bed. And in the mornings, I would hear her moving around before sunrise, and I would get up and make coffee, and we would sit at the kitchen table the way we used to when she was in high school, and everything felt hard and endless. She didn't cry much. That's not Iris. She got quiet instead, and careful. And I could see her rebuilding something inside herself the way you rebuild after a bad storm. Slowly, checking each piece before you put it back. Philip did not come to my house. I don't know if that was his decision or his lawyer's. Lorraine, I found out through Raymond, had contacted her own attorney the same evening I'd mentioned recording the call. Raymond found that very interesting. People who have nothing to hide don't usually lawyer up in the first 12 hours, he said. The police had taken Iris's report. They had spoken to Cecile. They had pulled the medical records. Raymond had made calls to people he trusted, and those people had made calls of their own, and slowly, quietly, the weight of it began to shift. I want to tell you about something my father told me because it's the thing I kept coming back to through all of this. My father worked his whole life with his hands, construction, mostly, some carpentry when work was slow. He didn't have much formal education, but he could look at a structure and tell you immediately what was holding it up and what was about to give way. He used to say that most things that collapse don't collapse all at once. They lean first, they give warning. And the mistake people make is they see the lean and they think, well, it hasn't fallen yet. And they wait. And they keep waiting. And then one day it falls on them and they're surprised. I thought about that every time I'd told myself to be patient with Lorraine. Every time I'd watched Iris smooth something over and told myself it was fine. I should have seen the lean earlier. I know that now. But I also know that knowing it doesn't change what happened, and it doesn't help Iris. And guilt is a weight you have to be careful with. You can carry it or you can put it down. I chose to put it down because I needed both hands for what came next. Lorraine made a mistake 6 days after everything happened. She went to my daughter's former workplace. Iris had taken leave, and she spoke to Iris's supervisor. I'm not entirely sure what she said, but the supervisor called Iris that evening, uncomfortable and apologetic, and from what she described, Lorraine had implied that Iris had a history of instability, that the marriage problems were mutual, that Philip was the one who had actually been afraid. Iris called me after she got off the phone with her supervisor. Her voice was shaking. Not with tears, but with something harder. She's trying to get ahead of it, she said. She's trying to build a story. I know. Mom. She paused. I want to fight her. I had been waiting for her to say that. Raymond had a contact. A woman named Audra who was a family law attorney and who had, according to Raymond, a very persuasive manner in front of a judge. We met with her the following morning. Audra was small, efficient, and gave absolutely nothing away in her expression, which I found reassuring. She listened to everything Iris told her without interrupting. She asked precise questions. She reviewed the medical documentation, Cecile's written statement, the text messages from Philip, and the notes I'd made immediately after my call with Lorraine. You wrote down exactly what she said? She asked me. Word for word, I said. My brother taught me to always write things down. She looked at me over her glasses. Your brother sounds useful. He has his moments. The restraining order came through 4 days later. Philip was served at his office. Lorraine was served at her home, which Raymond told me she did not take quietly, though there was nothing she could do. There is a moment I want to tell you about because I think about it often. It was 3 weeks after everything on a Sunday morning. Iris and I had driven to the farmer's market, the same one I'd been returning from the day I got Cecile's call. We were walking between the stalls, and Iris stopped at a table selling preserves. She picked up a jar of fig jam and turned it over in her hands, reading the label, and the light was coming through the trees in that specific morning way. And she looked up at me and said, completely out of nowhere, I think I'm going to be okay. She didn't say it like a question. She said it like something she'd just decided. I didn't say anything. I just reached over and squeezed her hand. She bought the jam. We ate it on toast at my kitchen table and didn't talk about any of it for the rest of the morning, and it was the best morning I'd had in months. The legal process took time, the way legal processes do. I won't walk you through every step because honestly, some of it was tedious in the way only paperwork can be tedious. But I want to tell you the outcome because Iris has given me permission to, and because I think it matters. Philip pled guilty to 1 count of domestic battery. He received probation, mandatory counseling, and a permanent protective order. He lost his job 4 months later, not because of legal consequences, but because these things come out, and they had come out, and the people he worked with had made their own decisions about him. Lorraine's visit to Iris's workplace became part of the civil case. Intentional interference, Audra called it, along with several other things. The civil case settled. I'm not going to tell you the amount because Iris asked me not to, but I will tell you that Iris is no longer worried about rent. And Cecile, who I had never met before, the worst morning of my life, came to Iris's small celebration dinner, a quiet thing at my house with just family and a few close friends, and she brought a bottle of wine and a card she'd made herself. And when Iris hugged her at the door, Iris held on for a long time. You didn't have to, Iris said. Of course I did, Cecile said. That's just what you do. I'm 65 years old. I'm 65 years old. I have learned, slowly and often reluctantly, that the world does not reorganize itself around what is fair. That cruelty exists inside families as readily as it exists anywhere. That the people who smile the warmest sometimes mean the least by it. But I've also learned, and this one I believe completely, that there are Ceciles everywhere, people who hear something through a fence and choose not to look away. People who drive to hospitals they have no obligation to attend and sit in waiting rooms for strangers because it's what you do. My father used to say that what holds a structure up isn't always the biggest beam. Sometimes it's the piece you almost didn't notice. Iris is doing well. She has her own apartment now, in a neighborhood she chose herself, with no input from anyone's mother. She has a cat she named Biscuit who is terrible and whom she loves extravagantly. She called me last week on a Tuesday afternoon for no reason at all. Just to talk, and we talked for an hour about nothing important. And I hung up and sat in my kitchen and thought, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. And Lorraine still has her Thursday nail appointments, as far as I know. She still drives her white Cadillac. But when Philip was sentenced, the local paper ran a small item, and her name was in it. And I think about that sometimes when I'm repotting my tomatoes. I think about it, and then I go back to work. I've had a lot of time to think about how things unfold. Not in some grand, cosmic sense. I'm not talking about fate or anything like that. I'm talking about the plain, observable fact that what people do tends to catch up with them. Not always on the timeline we'd prefer, not always in the way we imagine, but it catches up. Lorraine spent 2 years building something. She was patient about it, I'll give her that. She chose her words carefully. She smiled at the right moments. She never left fingerprints on anything obvious. She thought she was being smart, and she was for a while. But the thing about constructing a false version of reality is that you have to keep building it, keep patching it, keep adding to it, and eventually the structure gets too big to hold up. Eventually you make a mistake. You show up somewhere you shouldn't. You make a phone call you shouldn't. You walk into someone's workplace and say things you can't take back. That's what happened with Lorraine. She overreached because she thought she'd already won. And the moment she overreached, everything she'd spent 2 years building started to come apart. I think about Iris during those 2 years, carrying all of that quietly, trying to keep peace, protecting me from worrying, protecting Philip from himself, protecting a marriage that one of its own in-laws was actively trying to destroy. That is an enormous amount of weight for one person to carry. And she carried it because she is strong, and because she'd been taught, as I was taught, that you try. You try before you give up. You don't walk away from something without being sure you've done everything you could. She tried. And when it became clear that trying wasn't enough, When her own body became the proof, she still had the presence of mind to crawl to a neighbor's yard instead of disappearing. She still fought back. That is not luck. That is character. Built over a lifetime, tested in a single morning. Raymond used to say that the smartest thing our father ever gave us wasn't any specific piece of advice. It was the habit of thinking before reacting, of writing things down, of knowing that your first move in a crisis should almost never be your loudest one. I used that every single day of this ordeal. I used it when Philip called and I let it ring. I used it when the rain called and I answered with exactly one sentence. I used it in Audra's office when I handed over notes I'd written in a hospital parking garage while a pigeon walked along a ledge in front of my car. The details matter. The composure matters. Not because composure feels good. It doesn't. Not when someone has hurt your child. But because composure is what turns pain into evidence, and evidence is what actually changes things. What I want people to understand, if they take anything from what happened to us, is that intelligence in a hard situation isn't about being clever. It's about staying clear-headed long enough to see what's actually in front of you. And integrity isn't about being the bigger person in some abstract sense. It's about making decisions you can live with after the adrenaline wears off. And resilience isn't about not breaking. It's about what you do after you bent further than you thought you could and discovered you're still standing. Iris is still standing. I'm still standing. Raymond is still making calls and knowing exactly what to say. And Cecile, a woman I didn't know existed a year ago, came to a dinner at my house and brought wine and a handmade card, and reminded me that decency is not as rare as it sometimes feels. That's the thing I keep coming back to. In the worst stretch of this, what held us together wasn't strategy or legal maneuvering or anything dramatic. It was people choosing, one small moment at a time, to do the right thing. Cecile going to check on a sound she heard through a fence. Raymond picking up his phone at whatever hour I called. Audra asking one more precise question. Iris, in the middle of everything, deciding she wanted to fight. You build that. You build it over years, quietly, without knowing when you'll need it. And then one July morning, when everything falls apart, it's already there.